Hello, thank you for joining us. I see several people are already logged in. We are going to get started right at 7:30, so in just a couple of minutes. If you are already logged in, if you could maybe type into, I think there's a chat feature, a question feature, if you can hear me and see the screen, that would be great, just so I can make sure that we are all, you guys are able to hear me. So I will kind of hang out for a second, but if you could just kind of give me a sort of a, hey, we can hear you, that kind of thing, that'd be great. Thanks. Okay, I see a couple people have typed a few things into the chat feature. Again, if someone could just let me know if they can hear me, that would be great. All right, it is just about 7:30 on the nose, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, I'm going to assume everyone can hear me. I haven't heard that anyone cannot. We do have a question option on this webinar, so if you do have questions, feel free to type those in. I do have someone that said they can hear me, so thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I will try to answer all questions. I'll probably hold those till the end, just because it is a little difficult to read the questions. They're somewhat small on my screen, so I'll probably hold those till the end, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. If you don't get your specific individual question answered during this presentation, you can always email me afterwards. I'd be happy to answer those at a later date. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for the test planning workshop. And my name is Sherry Elmore. All right, just a second. There we go. And I am the ACTSAT director for LEAP. I have been working for LEAP for about 8 or 9 years, and you can also see Lisa Marker Robbins, who is the founder and president of LEAP and the creator. So our goal and passion is to help families through this college-bound journey with the whole testing process, as well as the college admittance, college applications, college essays, interviews, all of those pieces that help a student stand out to a college. So tonight we're kind of focusing on the test planning timeline. And our goal for you when you leave this webinar this evening is that you have a mapped out timeline for your specific child, so that this will help reduce stress and maximize the efficiency with which you take these tests, or your child takes these tests. I know we probably have some students on the webinar as well as some parents. So continuing on, you were emailed a handout, and it looks like this. So hopefully you were able to print that out. It's fine if it was printed out in black and white, doesn't need to be in color. But this is the handout that we are going to be referring to. So whenever I refer to a worksheet, this is what I'm talking about. So we're going to start on this side. There's 2 different sides to the worksheet, and we're going to be starting on this side, and I will refer to the different columns. So as you can see, there's step 1, step 2, step 3, and then there's a notes column. So I will be referring to this throughout the presentation. So as I mentioned a minute ago, our goal is for each student to have their own individualized testing plan. So we would like it in a perfect world that there be no students testing in the fall of their senior year when they're filling out their college applications. And when I say fall, college applications go live on August 1st of 2018. So that's really when the whole application process starts for seniors. So if you are sitting here as a junior, that's 60 days away from now. It's not that far. We're talking 9, 10 months away from now. You will be working on your college applications. Our ideal goal would be that everyone has their applications finished and submitted by November 1st. So you've got a small window of time when you're really focusing on those applications, so it can help if you don't have to worry about testing during that time frame. Now, there are kids that will need to test during that time frame, and it's okay. We're just trying to minimize stress by, if we can at all possible, have a student be finished with testing by the summertime. So that's sort of the goal. So let's just talk briefly about an overview for the different age levels. So if you are on this call and you have a sophomore or freshman, just kind of know that you're projecting this out a couple of years, a year or two. This workshop webinar is really designed for kids that are in their junior year. No problem if you have younger kids and you wanted to participate, that's great. Happy to have you on. Just know that I'm talking to an 11th grade audience. So whenever I speak about 11th graders or what's going on this year, you'll kind of project that out a year or two depending on the age of your child. So our goal would be in 11th grade, for all 11th graders, you're going to most likely be taking the PSAT in October, and many of you have already done that. That took place a couple weeks ago. Schools gave it during the week. In some cases, some schools gave it on a Saturday, but that is typically done for juniors in October of junior year. So that's kind of past. Those scores will be out and available to juniors depending on the state that you live in. We have callers from all across the country, but depending on your state, either December 11th, 12th, or 13th, scores will be released to students, and you can check them in your College Board portal or online account. So one thing students could be doing now is figuring out, how do I log into that? What's my username and password to get into the College Board account? Beyond that, 11th graders need to map out 2 to 3, possibly 4 times when you would take the ACT or SAT throughout the junior year, keeping in mind that many states, we have the majority of our callers are from Ohio, or participating tonight are from Ohio, mainly because we are located in Ohio. So the state of Ohio gives a state test to all juniors, and each school in the state gets to choose whether they're giving the ACT or the SAT. Other states, such as Colorado, they give the SAT to all of their juniors. So different states give different tests, and some states, I believe, for example, California, I don't believe that they offer a state test. So, but you want to keep that in mind. If your state does offer a state test, or if you're not sure if they do, find out. Typically, a state test is paid for by the state, meaning that the student gets a free attempt at the ACT or SAT test. So it does not cost the family anything out of pocket to take that test. In your junior year, that's what you're looking at, the basically testing. As soon as summer rolls around and you become a senior, August 1st, you're going to start thinking about your college applications. That doesn't mean that you can't do some things in June and July of August to kind of get prepared, but really August 1st, full swing. July through September would be your final testing attempts, or June through September even. And ideally, September is going to be your final attempt. Depending on the school that you're applying to, there are some instances where seniors can test in late October. There is a national ACT test date coming up this Saturday, October 28th, and next year it will be October 29th, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And so that is really the final opportunity for a lot of kiddos. Some schools do have a November 1st deadline for applications, and then if that's the case, you really are locked into September being your last attempt. So kind of keep that in mind. As you go on these college visits for junior year and you're visiting different schools, find out when their deadline is for their college applications. Now, many schools have a couple different deadlines. You always want to apply by the earliest deadline, if at all possible. The earliest deadline is typically called early action. There are some schools that have an early decision deadline. That is binding, and you can only do that at one school. It's not really recommended because you're pretty much locked into that school if they accept you. But early action is a great option because generally the school is a little bit more forgiving or a little bit more generous with their acceptances, and many schools tie their merit-based scholarships to those that apply by early action. You're kind of telling the school, if you apply early action, hey, we're really excited about this school. I'm really interested in you, and I really want to get into this school. And so a lot of colleges have started tying their merit-based scholarship and offering that only to those students that meet those early deadlines. And I would venture to guess that every parent sitting out there and probably every student sitting out there would like the opportunity to earn merit-based scholarship money, because that's going to be scholarship money you do not have to pay back. So ideally you're going to meet those early action deadlines. And again, you want to check, each school has a different policy. So as you visit schools, you can ask those questions. Do you have early action? Is early action tied to merit-based scholarship? What is your early action deadline? Many, many schools have a 12/1 or December 1st early action deadline, but there are some schools. The biggest one in the state of Ohio that has a November 1st deadline is the Ohio State University. So if you're applying to that school, you have to have everything in by November 1st. So kind of keep that information in mind. State testing, I talked a little bit about this a second ago. There are state tests that are given in various states around the country. As I mentioned, we are located in Ohio, so I'm going to talk about Ohio for just a second, and you will want to find out what your particular state does. But these would be offered at your high school during the regular school day. It counts towards graduation. So this is an actual real administration of the test. If you are happy with your score, or if this is your highest test score, it can be used to apply to college. So you can send these scores off to colleges. In the state of Ohio, there are 2 different dates for each of the 2 tests. So as I mentioned, in Ohio, each school district gets to choose if they're going to give the ACT or the SAT. If they choose the ACT, they get to choose between February 27th or March 20th. If they choose the SAT, they will choose between March 7th and April 10th. So in some cases, the state test is going to be the student's first attempt at testing. In some cases, it's going to be their last attempt. Or it could be your in-between, your middle attempt. So that's our goal, is to try to figure that out tonight. So the first thing we want to do is, if we're looking at our worksheet and we're going to go under step number 1 or column number 1 of the worksheet I showed to you before, hopefully you've printed that out, we are looking to determine what is our busy season. Everybody has a different busy season throughout the course of the year. So what's busy for one student might not be busy for another student. So I want you to think about your particular family, your particular child, specifically the child that you're joining the webinar for, meaning the junior or sophomore. So I know everybody has usually multiple kids, and every kid has different activities, so they might be busier at different times of the year. But we're specifically talking about, okay, this particular child who you're putting together a testing timeline for this evening. Think about things like, what do you do over the summer? What kind of vacations or camps or jobs or things does the student do over the summer? What kind of sports or activities is your child involved in? Band, football, the musical at school, you know, a specific sport or a specific volunteer that is really busy at a certain time of the year. Does your child take a lot of AP classes, in which case May is going to be a really stressful time for them because they're going to be busy with their AP exams. So you want to figure out what is busy for my child, and then you want to kind of list that. What times of the year are the most busy? Now, I realize that some things, like maybe a piano lesson or something, you're going to be busy kind of consistently throughout the year. If you take a weekly piano lesson or do something on a weekly basis, that might just be kind of a consistent. But there are some things that kids do that are sort of a lot busier at a certain time of the year. So that's what we want to identify, because if at all possible, we want to try to avoid testing during our busiest season. We've had all kinds of crazy situations happen with families in the past where kids have planned to do all this test prep leading up to the June test date, only to realize that they were going to be on vacation. And in some cases, we had one instance where a family was supposed to leave on Friday for vacation, realized that the test was on Saturday, and they'd already signed up for tutoring, and the child was tutoring, and they just put it all together kind of late in the game. So they decided to leave a day late for vacation, which is kind of a bummer, number one. But number two, they literally dropped the student off at the ACT test in the morning, went home, packed up the car, the minivan, and they were sitting in the parking lot waiting to pick the kid up to leave for vacation. So, you know, those kinds of things add a little element of stress to the student, and they probably don't want to be there that day. They'd rather be on vacation. We also had a circumstance where a student planned to take the test and realized it was their spring break and they were going to be out of town. So that student changed their test date and took the test in Florida. So you can do that, but again, who wants to take a test on their spring break? So you want to think about those things and try to plan around them. If you are a cross-country runner, the September test date, which is always the first or second Saturday of September, is a popular ACT test date for a lot of kiddos. And it also happens to be in the state of Ohio a date that there are some huge cross-country meets across the state. So if you're a big cross-country runner, you don't want to plan on testing in September. So unless you don't mind missing a cross-country meet, and most kids don't want to do that. So kind of keep that in mind. So we're looking at those types of things when I say determine busy. And that's going to be different for each family that is on this process. So we are going to talk about ACT versus SAT. Which test should my child take? I get that question all of the time, and I even see that somebody had typed that into the chat question feature. And again, if I don't answer your question, I know there's some questions in there, I'll go through all the questions at the end and answer specific questions. But I did happen to see that somebody already tested me about which test should you take. And again, this is going to be kind of individual for each student, but I'm going to try to guide you through this and give you, some pointers on which test you should go with. So generally speaking, if a student has taken a pre-ACT test at school, which is an ACT test that's normed for 10th graders, 9th graders, and 10th graders that some districts give to their students, and or if a student has taken a PSAT, which is a pre-SAT, we can compare those two scores and help determine which test your child might be better at taking. What we would do is we would look at a concordance, and I'll pull that up in a second, which compares ACT and SAT test scores, and or we would look at percentiles for the two tests and see which test percentile you're scoring higher on. A lot of kids don't take the pre-ACT, but most kids take the PSAT just because almost every school district gives the PSAT. So oftentimes we're taking a PSAT score and we're comparing it to a student's first ACT attempt, or if they've done a practice or diagnostic ACT test, we can compare it to that. So we will look at, and I'll pull a concordance up and then we'll go back to that slide in a second. We will look at the two sets of scores and sort of concord them or compare the scores and determine which test a student is going to be better at taking. So if you look at this chart, it gives you a little snippet, and if we kind of look at, try to use a tool here. So if we look at, for example, if a student got a 1200 on the PSAT, we can look and say, okay, that's about equal to a 25. And so if you've taken an ACT test score, we would be able to look at your ACT score and compare it and decide, maybe you've already taken an ACT and you got a 26. In which case, all right, you're scoring a little higher than the SAT. And so we might decide that you would go ahead and focus on the ACT test. Or the reverse might happen. Maybe you took an ACT and you got a 21 and you had a lot of trouble finishing it, and your PSAT, you got a 1240. Well, that's a pretty big difference. So the 1240 is equal to about a 26, so maybe you'd want to focus on the SAT. So we look at those types of things when we're trying to determine which test a student should take. Likewise, we'll also, okay, let me see if I can go back here. Let me see, I want to go back, hold on. Bear with me, there we go. In the absence of any scores that if you don't have any of those pre-scores to look at, we kind of look at a couple different factors. 94% of the schools in the state of Ohio have chosen to give the ACT for your state test. So that means that you're going to have a free opportunity to take the ACT, and that's always a valuable opportunity. Historically, the ACT test is easier to improve your score. Just as a general rule of thumb, it's a little easier, it's a little bit more straightforward the way the questions are worded, and so it is a little bit easier to see a bigger jump in an ACT score, as a general rule. Also, there's limited data on the new SAT, and when I say new SAT, the SAT was overhauled in March of 2016. So if you are a parent on this call, you will likely remember back when you took the test, it had a high score of 1600, which was 2 sections of 800 points apiece. There was a math section, English section. About 10 to 12 years ago, the SAT converted to a new score out of 2400, and what they did is they made the test out of 3 components: a math component, just like it always had, an English component, and a reading component, each worth 800 for a total of 2400. Well, about 4 or 5 years ago, SAT realized that they were losing ground to the ACT, and they did a complete plan for an overhaul on their SAT test that was going to debut in March of 2016. So they did roll out a brand new test. They made a lot of changes to it. It's a little bit less of a reasoning test. It's still a reasoning test, a little bit more like the ACT. There's still some differences, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But as a general rule, they kind of went back to the old scoring system of 1600 points, 2 sections, again, back to just the math section, and then a combined English reading section. With that, the test has only been given probably 8 times since the new test debuted. So we have limited data on this new SAT. So even though there is a concordance out there that compares the new SAT with the ACT, it's still limited. And as our sample size grows, meaning as more and more kids take the SAT, we will have more valuable data on that new SAT test. Okay, so one of the biggest driving factors for putting together your testing timeline for your student is their math course work. So if you want to look at step number 2 or column 2 on that test planning workshop or worksheet, excuse me, we are looking at, actually, I'm sorry, back up for 1 second. Let's go back. Kind of skipped step 2, didn't I? So if you go back to step 2, I want you to check off if your child has taken the PSAT, the pre-ACT, or if they've checked off if they take the SAT or the ACT. If they've taken any of those tests, go ahead and put a little check mark in front of those tests on your column number 2. And then if you know the scores, and if you don't have them handy, you can always fill those in later, but write those scores down. So we do want to kind of identify if you've taken the test. If you haven't, that's okay. It's not a problem if you have not. Okay, moving on to column number 3, we're going to look at your math completion. So when are you taking Algebra 2? So the math portion of both the ACT and the SAT contain concepts up through Algebra 2. So the completion of your Algebra 2 coursework really drives the testing timeline. So this is sort of the key component of when you're going to start testing. So the average 11th grader typical 11th grader, will be taking Algebra 2 as a junior. And the average, if you are an accelerated 11th grader, you're probably taking pre-calc as a junior. So I want you to go to column 3 and write down, what is your 10th grade math course? If you're an 11th grader, what was your 10th grade math course? And what is your current 11th grade math course? If you are a 10th grader currently, write down the math class that you're in and then what you would be taking next year. There are some schools that have creative names for their math courses. For example, there is a school that we work with closely that names their math courses Integrated Math 1, Integrated Math 2, Integrated Math 3. And through the course of those 3 years, you're covering your Algebra 1, your Geometry, and your Algebra 2 content. So keep that in mind. There are some schools out there that block schedule. So it's possible that you can accelerate yourself a little bit if you take continuous math, but you're doing it on a block schedule. There are some schools out there that put their math sequence in a different order. For example, they might do Algebra 1, then Algebra 2, then Geometry. If your school does that sequencing, then you're looking at when do you finish Geometry. That's going to be your driving factor. But as a general rule of thumb, kids take Algebra 1 first, then Geometry, then Algebra 2, and then they go into a pre-calculus course. So write down on your third column of your worksheet when you will be taking, or what you'll be taking in 10th grade and what you'll be taking in 11th grade. And then below that, I want you to write, if you are taking 11th grade Algebra 2, then I want you to write first test in winter of junior year. Now, for some of you, that might be the state test. If you don't have a state test in your state, that would probably be the February test attempt. Okay, there's one on February 10th coming up this winter. If you are in pre-calculus as a junior, then your first attempt, perhaps you've already taken your first attempt. It could have been in September. It could have been in October. It could be this coming Saturday, as a matter of fact, or it could be December 9th. So if you are in pre-calc as a junior, you really want to consider having your first attempt to be December 9th. There still is time to sign up for that test. The deadline to register for the ACT, I believe, is November 3rd, which is about 10 days away. The last date to register, or the early regular registration deadline for the SAT is November 2nd. So they're both at the end of next week. You still have a late registration period for the December 9th test for both tests. Actually, the SAT is December 2nd and the ACT is December 9th. But there is a late registration period for both tests. However, they are going to charge you an additional $20 to register. So if you are a junior, you're in pre-calc, I would seriously consider testing on December 2nd or December 9th. So we've got test dates here. If you flip over to the back side of the worksheet, we're going to talk about these test dates in detail. We're going to talk about the ACT timeline and the SAT timeline. And so what I'm going to do is, this is just to show you the side of the worksheet that I'm on, so you can kind of have a visual of where I am on the worksheet. But we're going to jump to this slide. So we're going to be looking at possible ACT test dates for the class of 2019. Now, I have all of the dates, all of the opportunities for the class of 2019 to test, starting with June 10th, which would have been the end of their sophomore year, all the way through September 8th, which would be the very last time that we would recommend that you test. Again, there is an October test date, but we'll talk about why that's not ideal. I kind of alluded to that, or we discussed it a little bit earlier. So you're going to see that I've got listed up here in kind of larger type 8 different test dates with the red line kind of in the middle. And then over in the lower right-hand corner, I have dates to avoid. Now, I'm going to first talk to those families who are in a state where they're giving a state test date. So the dates to avoid in that gray box apply if your state gives a state test, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But so looking up here, June 10th and September 9th are already gone, so you can't take the test on those dates. They're those dates have passed. It's possible as a junior, maybe you've already taken the test on one of those 2 dates, but if you haven't, you can't go back and do that. So September or October 28th is coming up in a few days. So if you've already registered for that, that's a possibility. And then, like I said, December 9th. So if you are in pre-calc, the 4 dates that are above that red line would be one of those dates should be your first attempt. Okay? So if you are in pre-calc, one of the dates above the red line should be your first attempt. If you are in Algebra 2, actually the state test, the first date below the red line will be your first attempt. Okay? For those of you that are in pre-calc, your first attempt hopefully is a date above the red line, one of those 4 options, and then your second attempt is the state test. And then you might be finished at that point. You do want to pick one more date beyond that, either June 9th, July 14th, or September 8th as your third and final possible attempt. You may not need a third attempt, but we always ask you to map out a third attempt. So when you're in that first column on the worksheet in the back side, I want you to circle under first attempt, circle what's going to be your first time to take the test. Is it going to be October 28th, December 9th, state test? Have you already taken it? So circle your first attempt. Then from there, you want to choose a second attempt. It could be, for some kids, it's possible that your second attempt might be December 9th. And then in which case your third attempt will be the state test, but that doesn't happen very often. Typically your second attempt is either going to be the state test or possibly June 9th or July 14th, and then leaving you a third possible attempt, one of those later times, June 9th, July 14th, or September 8th. So kind of look at that and circle an option for each. For those of you that are in Algebra 2, you want to pick this under your first attempt, you're going to do the state test. And then under your second attempt, it's probably going to be June 9th or July 14th. And then your third attempt would be September 9th as your possible option. Okay? Now, why do I have these dates in the gray box to avoid? That is because with the timing of these state tests, particularly in Ohio, February 10th is very close to February 27th, as well as March 27th is really close to April 14th. So those dates in the gray box are really, really close to already existing state test dates. And then the October 27th date is too close to deadlines for college applications because that's October 27th of 2018. So that's like fall of senior year. So we would like to avoid those dates if at all possible. Now, if you live in a state that does not offer the state test, then February 27th and or April 14th would come into play, and those would be viable options of dates that you would choose from. Still try to avoid October 27th. I would recommend that anybody avoids that date simply because it is so close to some college deadlines. If at all possible, you want to try to avoid that. So that would be this is for ACT timeline. Let's look at the SAT possibilities. So we're going to have kind of a similar formula here. If you are in pre-calculus as a junior, your first attempt can be one of the dates above the red line. So you would circle one of those dates. If you've already tested on June 3rd, August 26th, or October 7th, great, you would just circle that. That was your first attempt. If not, November 4th is coming up. You would have already had to have registered for that test in order to be able to take it. And then beyond that, you've got December 2nd. If you're looking, then your second attempt would be one of the state test dates. As an Algebra 2 taker, if you're in Algebra 2, your first attempt is going to be the state test if your state offers it, and then you're going to choose a second and third attempt from there. We have the dates to avoid. We have March 10th and November 3rd, and that is, those dates are really close to the state test dates. So again, if your state does not offer a state test, then March 10th is fine. November 3rd is not ideal because that is after the November 1st deadline that a lot of schools have out there, as we mentioned before. So that gives you kind of an overview timeline. Now, you might still be saying to yourself, okay, well, I don't really know still what test to take. And so we're going to get to that in a second. So hang on. Do you need SAT subject tests? We get a lot of questions about our subject tests. Those are SAT tests that are specifically geared toward a particular topic, like biology or English Lit or Spanish or math. And there are 20 different tests that you can choose from. They are not offered in March. We ideally recommend that you take them on one of the orange colored dates that you see up there. Obviously, June 3rd was for 2017. That date's passed. So for juniors, you're looking at May 5th or June 2nd. Now, there are other dates, as you can see, available to take these tests. Why do we like May 5th and June 2nd? That is because we recommend that you take SAT subject tests in a topic of which you've taken an AP course load in your junior year or potentially your sophomore year. Senior year is not going to work because you're going to already have applied to college by then. So some schools recommend or require them, and they're going to be more of your highly selective colleges. So if a school does recommend or require these tests, we do encourage you to take them. You can take them up to 3 in a day, and you can take them on the same, you cannot take them on the same day that you would be taking the regular SAT. So if you are applying to a highly selective school that recommends or requires these tests, you will need to map out a date when you would want to take these. There are not a lot of schools out there that require them, just FYI. Okay, when do we have to revise our plan? Because, you know, we always, a plan is great, but sometimes the plan has to be altered. Something might happen unexpected on test day. This happens all of the time. Kids get sick on test day. Boyfriends break up with their girlfriends the night before, which is pretty cruel. Girlfriends break up with their boyfriends. We've had a student get into a little fender bender on a snowy day in February on the way to the test. She still managed to get there on time and take the test, but she was rattled, so she did not get her best score. So you just never know what's going to happen on test day. That's why I recommend that you map out at least 3 attempts, because if something happens on day one, the first or second attempt, you still have that third date sort of planned out or in the works. If you can't resolve your pacing issues on the ACT, you might need to take the test a 3rd time. If you're planning on taking the ACT at this point in time, but in December you get your PSAT scores back and you want to touch base with me and want me to help you determine, just make sure which test you should focus on, you might find out in a small percentage of students that, hey, you're actually better at the SAT than you are the ACT. So then maybe you have to revise your plan and work in a time or two to take the SAT. You may find out that there are some additional scholarship dollars tied to a higher test score. We recently had this actually past June, actually it was in, I want to say May, a student contacted us and she had gotten into the University of Alabama at Huntsville, and they had told her if she could get 1 more point on her ACT, and she was a senior, she was already admitted to the school, they'd already offered her a scholarship package, but they said, hey, if you can get 1 more point, we'll bump you up to a full tuition scholarship. So, which was equal to, I want to say, it was quite a few thousand. I want to say it was maybe an additional $6,000 a year. It was a decent amount, times 4. So you're talking about a decent amount of money. So here's a senior. She thinks she's done with testing. She's basically graduating, and she's coming to us and asking for help to prepare for the June ACT test. And the college basically said, if you take the test in June and you improve your score, we'll give you that full tuition scholarship. So she literally had to go take the ACT after she had graduated from high school. She graduated, late May, early June. Here she was taking the ACT on June 9th, trying to get that score. And she actually did improve her score by 1 point and earn that full scholarship. So in some cases, something like that may come up, and you might end up finding yourself taking the test again. So there are times when you may have to revise your plan, but having a plan can help reduce the stress of that and kind of help things run a little bit more smoothly. Okay, now let's get to the question, the heart of, all right, which test should my child take? And, you know, when you hang up from this webinar, you might not know for 100% certainty which test your child is going to be better at taking. I'm going to give you some generalizations about the two different tests. You can kind of look at where your child is. The bottom line is, if you don't have any data whatsoever on your child for either test, and you aren't sure at all, there's a couple things you can look at. And so we'll talk about those at the end once I go over the two different tests. If you have no idea, I'll give you a couple different things to focus on to kind of guide you. The content on the test focuses on English, grammar, and writing. It focuses on reading. There's a section on reading for reading comprehension and vocab, and really speed of reading. In addition, it focuses on math up through Algebra 2, as we talked about. There can be a couple basic pre-calc questions on the test, more likely on the ACT than the SAT, but they're going to be basic. And science is on both tests. The ACT has a separate science section that focuses on reading and interpreting data, and there is some science on the SAT as well. And the final component could be the essay, which, as you can see, is in a lighter purple color, and that is because the essay is optional, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but it's a chance for students to submit a writing sample. So the tests are more similar than ever. However, let's look at the differences between the two tests. So in general, and again, these are generalizations, but the ACT is a faster-paced reading test. Definitely faster paced. You really have to work at a very fast clip to get through the test. And that is one of the #1 complaints we hear from kids when they go take the test cold or they've done minimal preparation, is that they cannot finish the test. And so one of the things that studying on your own or taking a prep class or working with a tutor can help you do is resolve those pacing issues. So the SAT seems to have a little bit more time. However, the questions are a little bit more in-depth and a little bit more thought-provoking and wordier. So while there are fewer questions, they require a little bit more thinking or a little bit more thought to answer them. The reading level on the ACT, which is about the 4th bullet point down, is a lower reading level than the SAT, which is the top bullet point you see under the SAT box. The reading level for the ACT is at about a 9th/10th grade level. So a freshman, sophomore level reading level for the ACT. However, for the SAT, the reading level is a 12th, 13th grade reading level, meaning senior in high school, freshman in college reading level. So if you have a student that is not a great reader or doesn't like to read, they're probably going to do better on the ACT because the reading level is lower and the wording of the questions is more straightforward. They may have trouble with pacing, but they're probably going to comprehend the information better on the ACT. There is easier and less vocabulary on the ACT. The SAT has much more difficult vocabulary, and there's more vocabulary. So again, if you don't have a student that's a good reader or doesn't read a lot, you can't really study for vocabulary at the last second, and there's just, vocabulary is so vast. So those that are students that are great readers, that have a very high level of vocabulary or a large vocabulary, the SAT might be a good fit for them. On the ACT, there are fewer inferencing questions. Again, that goes back to the lower reading level, more straightforward questions, less reasoning. So those for some kids might be easier to answer. One of the things that the ACT is a bit more challenging on the math component, the math is a little harder. However, it only counts as a 4th of the test, whereas on the SAT, it is half of your test score. Now, if you hate geometry or geometry is a struggle for you as a student, only 6% of the math questions on the SAT cover geometry concepts. So some kids really like that feature, whereas on the ACT, about 20 to 30% of the questions can be geometry level questions. One of the things I will say about the SAT math, and if you jump down to the bottom 2 bullet points, is there is a no calculator section on the SAT. So there is a whole section of 13 questions that does not allow you to use the calculator. So you need to keep that in mind when you're taking the test. So some kids, that will stress them out, even though theoretically you should be able to do every question on the ACT without a calculator. Now, it's going to slow some kids down tremendously, and they might not be able to get through the test if they don't have their calculator. But they say that the questions are set up that every question could be answered without a calculator. The other thing you want to consider about the math, again, ACT math is a little harder, a little bit more geometry, but it only counts as a fourth of your total score. On the SAT, a little bit less difficult math, only 6% geometry, no calculator section. However, it has a non-multiple choice section of questions on both the non-calculator and the calculator portion of the test. There are 5, I think, of those questions on the non-calculator section, and I believe 13, or maybe it's 8, excuse me, that'd be 8 on the multiple choice section. I mean the calculator section. What that means is those questions don't have multiple choice answers to choose from, and students work the problem out, they get an answer, and then they bubble the answer in on a grid. So you do need to practice that, students, if you're going to take the SAT. It can be a little tricky until you get the hang of how that works. There is a science section on the ACT that's a separate science section that is a reading and reasoning test, versus on the SAT, if you look at the 4th bullet point down, basically they sprinkle the data interpretation and the graphs and the scientific material throughout the test. So they might have in the reading or the grammar section a question that is scientific in nature, and you're answering questions about that. Or in the math section, they're going to embed some data interpretation questions in there. So they don't have a separate science section per se, but they do sprinkle science information or questions throughout the test. One of the biggest questions we get, and you can see at the bottom of the screen there, is, well, how do I know which test I want to take depending on the colleges that I attend? Every college in the country will take either test, so on equal footing. So if you are on this call and you live on the East or the West Coast, you likely are more familiar, more comfortable, hear more people talking about the SAT test. If you're on this call and you're in the middle of the country, kind of the Midwest, you likely hear more people talking about the ACT. So there are regions of the country that sort of tend to favor one test over the other, and I think that goes back to, there was a time, and that time was when, back in the day when I was applying to college, where there were some colleges that took the ACT and some colleges that took the SAT. That no longer is the case. Every college will take either test. The goal for you as a student, or parents, for you as a parent to help your child, is to figure out which test does my child favor or is going to score higher on, and then you work to get that particular test score as high as humanly possible. If you apply with an ACT score to a college that's traditionally an SAT college, meaning it's in the East Coast and more people send in SAT scores, they're just going to convert your ACT score using a similar concordance chart, like I showed you earlier in the presentation, to an SAT score. Likewise, if you apply to a school in the Midwest that's traditionally, most people are sending ACT scores, and you send in an SAT score, they're just going to convert that over to an ACT. So again, the goal is figure out which test your child is better at taking, and then go with that test. Now, if you're still not sure, you know, if you listen to this and you kind of have a sense of, okay, my student might be this way or that, you're leaning towards one or the other, or if then great. You know, if you have a kid that is not a student lover, like doesn't love school. I shouldn't say student lover, I should say school lover, lover of school, lover of education, going to class, taking tests. And there are kids out there like that. I have one of my own children that falls into that category. You're probably going to want to pick one test and focus on it, and it's probably going to be the ACT, just as a general rule of thumb. And that's okay. That's great. If you have a student that isn't sure, you don't really have any data, they really want to take both tests, and they just really want to try both one time and see where they fall, great, let's do it. Try to take them both close. For example, go to December 2nd and December 9th, back to back. Get those scores back. They'll come back around the same time. We can compare the two scores and see which one they're scoring better on, and then move forward from that. In the rare case that the student's score is equal on both tests, it doesn't happen very often, but it does occasionally happen, then we look at the student and we say, okay, which test felt more comfortable for you? Which test did you like the feel of better? And then we'll go with what the student's gut is telling them. But for the most majority of the kiddos, if they've taken a PSAT in October, we're going to use that score and we'll compare it with their first ACT if they don't have a pre-ACT, and then we can figure out which tests they're better at taking and move forward from there. Okay, so that's kind of my 2 cents on ACT versus SAT. And like I said, there isn't a right answer here. There might be a right choice for your child, but as far as colleges are concerned, either is great. Okay, so what's the right choice as far as the optional portion of the ACT and SAT writing? So when you take the ACT and SAT, or when you register for that test, they're going to ask you if you want to take the optional writing portion. It is at the end of the test, so it's the last portion of both tests. If you choose not to do it, you will leave once the multiple choice portions of the test are over, and those students that are going to do the writing will stay and finish the writing. For the ACT, you have 40 minutes. For the SAT, you have 50 minutes. There is an extra charge associated with the writing test. It is not typically offered on the state test date. So if your school offers a state test in your state, it's going to be the 4, whether it's ACT or SAT, it's going to be the multiple choice sections. It is not going to include the writing. You cannot pay extra. A lot of people will say, well, can I just pay extra and take the writing on that day? No, it doesn't work that way. We do recommend that you take the writing one time. Keeping in mind, you want to check your state, but in the state of Ohio, there are no schools, public or private, that require the writing. If you have older kids that applied to college 2-3 years ago, there were some colleges out there that did require the writing that have since dropped that requirement. What we find is if students are looking at a wide variety of schools, in-state, out-of-state, different areas, there's typically going to be at least one school that requires the writing. So we recommend that you do take the writing score at least once. That way you at least have a writing score to submit to a college if the college requires it. If you don't take the writing at all, your application would not be complete at any school that requires the writing. Now, several years ago, and this is admittedly about 4 years ago, there was a student that I came across to and met the parents late in the game. The student had already applied to college when I met this family, and they said, oh, our son, and they found out what I did for my job, and they're like, oh, let me tell you a story. They said, our son took the ACT once and got a 28. He was thrilled, so he didn't take it again. Now, my recommendation would always be to take the test at least twice, because the majority of kids are going to improve their score on a second attempt. So that's neither here nor there. This student took it once, was happy with the score, applied to all the colleges he wanted to apply to, and his first choice school was Florida Gulf Coast, down in Florida. And this student lived in Ohio. Well, the student kind of kept noticing that his application, all of his information wasn't complete at Florida Gulf Coast. So ultimately he got an email from them and they said, hey, you didn't submit an ACT writing score, an SAT writing score, and your application's not complete. And that was his #1 choice school. So he had to, back at this point in time, you were allowed to go and stand take the test standby. You can no longer do that. You have to apply you have to register ahead of time. But he showed up standby, took the test in December. He had to take the entire test just to get that writing score. So you don't want that to happen to you. So take the writing score once. You don't need to take it maybe more than once. If you're applying to a highly selective or an IB school that requires it, you might want to follow up with me and see if your writing score's up where it needs to be if you're applying to those schools. So you might need to take the writing part twice if you're applying to highly selective schools. But kind of look at your list of schools now and see if they require it. Our belief is that going into the future, more and more schools are going to drop it, and that this portion of the test may ultimately be retired and no longer a portion. It's tough to really do an effective, accurate writing sample for a student in 40 or 50 minutes. So I think schools are kind of starting to think, is this really something that we want to look at when we're admitting students? Because most kids, when they're under a time crunch like that and have to write, it's tough to come up with, a really well-developed essay in that short of a time frame. So when you're looking at what should you do to maximize your test score, so hopefully now you've kind of mapped out, all right, maybe first attempt, second attempt, possible third attempt. Maybe you're starting to lean towards one test or another based on the information that I provided to you about the two tests. But, a lot of people say, well, we just want to get a cold attempt. We want to go take it cold the first time, just want to see where we are, and then go from there. And there is nothing inherently wrong with that. Just keep in mind that the test is, and we'll get into the cost in a second, but it's, upwards of $60 if you do the writing. So to take it cold and give up a whole Saturday and spend that kind of money when it's not going to be your first attempt, that's up to you if you want to do that. Typically that results in the student taking the test at least 3 times. But we would recommend that you either do kind of a baseline practice diagnostic test somewhere in your area. LEAP offers free diagnostic tests. We have one coming up on December 9th. And or you could look in your area and see if you could take one, or take one at home on your own. It may not be quite as accurate, but it should give you an idea. We recommend doing some type of prep prior to your first attempt. Learn the strategies, learn some pacing techniques, and work on pacing and timing, and get some of that worked out before you take it for the first attempt so that you can get your first attempt in as a fairly valid test attempt. And then you can build on that prior to a second. What should you do? What can I do to build on that first score before I take it again the second time? So things that you want to look at, or when you're looking at different prep programs that are out there, figure out how long the program's been in existence. How many years have they been doing this? Who are their instructors? Are they certified, experienced teachers? Do they have a degree in their content area? Just because somebody scored really high on the ACT or SAT themselves does not necessarily mean that they're qualified to tutor or instruct. I mean, they might be, but doesn't necessarily mean that. What kind of results does that program typically see? Ask those questions. What's the student-to-teacher ratio that you typically see in a group class if you're doing small group class? Do they have 30, 40 people in a class, or is it a smaller, more intimate class size? If you're doing individual tutoring, what does that look like? Is it one student, one teacher? Is there one instructor that's covering all the content areas, or do you have like a math person that's an expert in math covering the math area, and an English person that's an expert in English covering the English area? And then what is the time and money that's involved that can be expected? How much is this going to cost me? So you want to ask those types of questions. Those are all general questions that no matter what prep program you're looking at in your area, you can get some really great information on that program by asking those types of questions. Okay, so what to expect? Again, you're ahead of the game. You're a step ahead because you do have a plan, or you're formulating a plan right now. When you go to take the test on your own, meaning not the state-sponsored test date, you will need to register on ACT.org or SAT.org for a test date that you're going to take on your own. Register early. Popular test dates fill, popular sites fill. A lot of high schools host the test, but the popular high schools typically fill up. The deadline to register for, I mentioned this earlier, for the December SAT and the December ACT are coming up at the end of next week, November 2nd and 3rd. So make sure you register to meet that regular deadline so you don't have to pay the late fee. Typically, your scores can be viewed in your online account about 10 days to 2 weeks after you take the test date, which is awesome. It's pretty fast. You can log in about, usually if you took it on a Saturday, count not the immediate next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that. So about 10 days later, start logging into your ACT or SAT account, and the scores will be in there typically. They do release them in batches, so they're not all going to be released on the same day. State test scores take a little longer. As a general rule, they're physically mailed to your house, and they can take 3 to 6 weeks to arrive. They eventually will show up in your online account, but it takes some time. As you can see, the cost is in the $60 range if you're going to take the writing. If you don't take it, if you don't do the writing portion, you're about $46. Sending scores to college. Now, if you look at that second to last bullet point, you will see that there's a price there. It's $13 to send an ACT score and $12 to send an SAT score to a college. Now, when you register for a test, it's going to ask you for 4 scores, or 4 schools where you would like to send the scores. Our recommendation is to hold off. We don't know how you're going to do on test day. I've given you a variety of little anecdotes of things that have happened to students on test day where their scores were not indicative of what they were capable of. So our belief would be that you would take the test as many times as you want, and then you look at the scores and you have control of which scores you send to the colleges. That is what I did with my son, who was a freshman in college. He took the test 3 times. We did not send the scores to any colleges. We waited. Now, I will tell you that he applied to 7 schools. So ultimately, we had to pay, and at the time, the ACT was $12 to send. They raised the price this year by $1. But we had to pay 7 times 12. We sent 1 score to 7 colleges, so it cost us $84. So there is a cost involved, but we look at it as a sort of insurance policy so that you're in control of what the college sees. There are a few schools out there, and they're going to be highly selective. I believe Georgetown is one, that the way their application is worded, it says, please submit all test scores that you've ever taken. And then you're on your honor to submit every single attempt. So again, keep that in mind. If you do qualify for accommodations, meaning extended time, there's 2 different types of extended time accommodations. There's also accommodations where you can have an individual, you can have a recording where it reads verbally gives you the instructions. You can have a test reader. You can have a scribe. You can have enlarged test materials. So there's all types of accommodations that they will make. You want to talk with your school guidance counselor to find out if your child might qualify for accommodations, and they can assist you with applying to apply for that. You want to do this early. Typically, the first time you do this, you need to be registered for a test date, and then you need to submit an application. Part of it comes from the parent, and then the school fills out part. Once it's accepted or approved, then you would receive those accommodations on any future test date. There are cases where the accommodations are not approved the first time, and you can appeal that. LEAP has worked with quite a few families and written appeal letters on their behalf to try to get their accommodations in place. Okay, we're kind of nearing the end, so just hang with me tight. We're almost going to wrap up here in just about 5 minutes, and then I'll do questions. But a question I often get is, what's a super score, and is that going to help me? So a super score can be done with an ACT test or an SAT test. And basically, what you would do is, if you've taken the tests multiple times, you can take your highest ACT, each individual section, so your highest English, your highest math, your highest reading, your highest science, over multiple attempts, and kind of combine that into a higher overall score. The same thing can be with the SAT, your highest math from one attempt and your highest reading and writing score from a second attempt. So let me give you an example. This is a real LEAP student that we worked with a few years ago. So he got a 24. The first time, you can see the composite score at the bottom. On the second attempt, he worked with LEAP, and he improved his score and got a 27. However, if you look the highlighted red score, his English score was dropped a little on a second attempt. And this happens sometimes. Even if kids, it's tough to improve in every area, so sometimes you're going to fluctuate in your score. So in this particular circumstance, to create a super score for this student, we're going to use his English score of 26 from his first attempt, and we'll combine that with his math score from his second attempt, which was a 26, and we'll pluck out his reading score from his second attempt, which was a 28, and then we'll take his science score from his second attempt, which was a 30. So as you can see here, if we look at this particular student had 96 total points on the first attempt, which rounded out to or averaged out to a 24. They had 108 total points on their second attempt, which averaged out to a 27. But when we add up their highest from each area, they get 110 points. And when we divide that by 4, we get 27.5, which rounds up to a 28. So in the eyes of a college, this particular student would have a 28 for that college. So the way this works is ACT does not create the super score for you. You would have to send the entire first attempt score and the entire second attempt score to the college. Then they would pull out each of these individual scores and average it out themselves, and it would come up to be a 28. So the same thing would work with an SAT. You would be responsible for sending the sets of scores that are going to show your highest for each area, and if the college super scores, they will create that super score for you, okay? When you send the score to a college, they are going to receive the entire test. They don't just receive the highest English score from your first attempt. They're going to see that you got a 25 in math, a 21 in reading, and a 24 in science. But if they super score, they'll use the highest from each of the individual test dates. So check with the school. It's a great question to ask if you're on a college visit. There is not a really easy website or list anywhere that just shows you which schools super score. Some schools super score both the ACT and the SAT. Some schools just super score one test or the other. Okay, we are getting to the end of the presentation, so we're ready for questions. We do have, and I should have changed this, October 28th, that really should say, that's coming up this Saturday, that's full. We do have a full-length practice test coming up in December. So if you would like to participate in either our Cincinnati location or our Columbus location, you can register on our website. We have in-person classes in both of those locations, in Cincinnati, both in Mason and on the east side of Cincinnati at Madeira High School, and then in Columbus in Lewis Center, which is just in the northern portion of Columbus, we have in-person classes. If you are participating from out of state and you would like to still participate in some type of a prep course with LEAP, we do offer an online class, and the next online class does start this coming Saturday, as well as many of our classes in Cincinnati and Columbus start in the coming week or two. So if you are interested in a class leading to a December test date, please check out the options right away. Okay, let's try to do some questions here. And I'm going to answer questions. So first question says, let's see, I'm trying to get to the top question first. Oh, lots of great questions. So I'm going to try to answer all these questions as I can. If you need to jump off, feel free. If you have other questions, go ahead and type those in now. I'm going to go through each of these and try to answer them as best I can. Okay, just bear with me. The little window is small, so I'm scrolling through. Okay. All right. First question, should a student take both the SAT and ACT and then choose which to submit to which schools? So we kind of talked about that. Like I said, ideally, if you want to try both one time, you're going to be narrowing it down to which test the student is scoring higher on, and then attempt to improve that score as much as possible. Okay, I'm a junior and I haven't taken the ACT yet. No worries, that's fine. As we talked about, this is the time the earliest juniors are going to be testing this fall, but if you want to start over the winter, depending on what math class you're in, you are not behind the 8 ball just because you're a junior and you haven't taken the ACT yet. So that's why you're on this call, to kind of map out a timeline, think about your activities, and try to maximize testing and minimize your stress level by testing when you aren't in the middle of a sports season or middle of musical or middle of marching band or something like that. If you're finished by Algebra 2, with Algebra 2 by Christmas, would you suggest taking the December 9th test as a first try? Yes, this is a great question. I love this question. So some of you might be in Algebra 2 in a block schedule situation at your school, meaning that you're finishing up Algebra 2 by Christmas. Absolutely, by all means, December 9th or December 2nd, if you're going to do the SAT, would be a great time to get started. There's still time to register. There's still time to get into a prep class if you want to do something to prepare. So absolutely, go ahead and sign up for that, and I would recommend that highly because that gets that first attempt out of the way. Great question. Oh, I love this question. How many times can you take the ACT? Well, you can take each test up to 12 times. I don't know anybody that's ever taken it 12 times. That's a lot of attempts. So I would, I don't recommend that. Map out 3 to 4 times, and that should be ample. Some kids only need 2 attempts. We have worked with kids in the past that have taken it 5 or 6 times. Generally speaking, those kids have tried to do it on their own and just gone and taken it 2 or 3 times without really doing much, and then they decide they want to get some prep or help. But we've worked with kids that started with us for the first attempt, and they've just been super motivated and had a really high goal, and they've been very driven. I really recommend that after about the 2nd or 3rd attempt, you really have a conversation with the student about how motivated the student is to try to improve their score on a 3rd or 4th or 5th attempt. Because as a general rule of thumb, if a student is not really motivated to take the test on a 3rd or 4th or 5th attempt, they're not likely to see much of an improvement on their score, okay? And also they need to be doing something. They shouldn't just go and take it randomly. They need to be either studying on their own or doing a prep class or tutoring. Do something to help improve your score. Okay, next question. My son took pre-calc as a sophomore. When should he start the first attempt? Yeah, if you took it as a sophomore, you can take the first attempt at the end of your sophomore year. Now, if a student's already a junior, that's not possible. But if you are going on this call and you are a sophomore and you're in pre-calc, end of junior year is great. I don't really recommend taking it much before then. You really want, at that point, you're still getting some of the core curriculum in the other content areas under your belt in 9th and 10th grade for English, reading, science. So really, end of sophomore year is the first time I would recommend taking the test for real. Now, if you want to do a practice diagnostic test or a free test, companies will offer that. Certainly do that kind of towards the end of sophomore year, that's fine. But really, anytime before that, there's really no data that shows that you're not going to get your highest score most likely, and there's really no reason. It's better to wait until you're in that junior year to really start testing. Okay, that's a great question. Okay, let's see. This is a good question. Can the writing score combine with another test that was taken on a different day? The answer to that question is yes. However, so if you took, let's say you take the test the first time and you take the writing, and then the second time you don't do the writing, and you apply to a school that requires the writing score, but your second overall composite score is higher than your first composite score. You would send both schools' scores to colleges, and they would look at the writing score from your first attempt, and then they would look at your composite score from your second attempt. So it's almost like they're doing a super score. Even if they don't super score individual areas on each test, they will, in effect, super score the writing portion. That's a great question.
And that's why we recommend that you just take the writing at least one time. Okay, so we have a child that's a freshman taking Algebra 2. Okay, that's going to circle back to the sophomore that took pre-calc. So this student who's a freshman taking Algebra 2 will be taking pre-calc as a sophomore. I really still recommend that you hold off till the end of your sophomore year to seriously start taking the ACT or the SAT. You know, if there's a PSAT test you want to have your child take as a sophomore at their high school, sometimes the schools will let sophomores take the PSAT. Go for it. That's great. If there's a pre-ACT opportunity, great. Again, if there's those free diagnostic or free practice tests in your area, that would be fine as well. But there is no point in taking an actual ACT before end of sophomore year. Okay. When should my child take ACT? Okay, so that is really going to come down again to the individual factor of what math your child is in as a junior and their activity level. So we kind of walked through that in detail. If you maybe joined late and you didn't really capture that information, you can certainly email me individually and provide me. I'll ask you for some information about your child, and I can help guide you on that in an individual basis. Next question. If I get a good essay writing score but a not so good test score on one test, and I get a good score but a bad essay writing score on another test, can I take the good essay score and the good test score and send to colleges? Or do I have to submit both tests, i.e. super scoring with an essay? So yes, a college will super score with the essay. However, you do have to send the complete the complete score result for both test attempts. They will not just send the writing score off of one test and just send the regular portion, the main portion, off of a second test. So the college would see the entire score from each of those two attempts. That's a great question. You guys have some really good questions tonight. Okay, let's see. Okay. They are new maths. Yes, somebody's asking about the new maths program. Yes, if you are a high-achieving student, new maths is a Northwestern University Midwest Academic Talent Search, I think is what new maths stands for. It's an acronym. And oftentimes students who are high-achieving may be invited to take the ACT or the SAT through new maths in 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade. And if your child is interested in that, yes, absolutely, that's fine. There's no harm in that. If you have a child I had a child that was invited to do that and was not interested at all, it sounded like torture to him, I didn't make him do it. So I would look to the child and ask the child, if they're not interested in taking an ACT or an SAT in 7th, 8th, 9th grade, there's really no reason that they have to do that. Some kids, you know, you can get an award or a certificate or be invited to some summer camps or things like that if you score exceptionally well on it as a young person. But that's completely up to the individual. So if you are advanced and you would like to try it, there's no harm in that. And that would be one avenue. They do have the kids in the testing center with regular juniors that are taking the test. So if your child, you know, some kids are intimidated by that, so kind of keep that in mind. So I think you have to know your child if you want to participate in the new maths program. Okay. Since the math is only up to Algebra 2, if a kid is done at freshman math and took AP Stats and is now taking pre-calc, will a kid forget a lot of it when he takes the test? That is a concern that you can have with these advanced math kids. Although most of the kids that are that advanced in math are pretty good at math, so they're probably not going to forget that much of it. But certainly there may be some concepts that they do need to review or brush up on. Even the regular kids that are taking Algebra 2 as a junior, some of the concepts on this test fall under pre-algebra that were introduced in 7th and 8th grade. So absolutely, there can be a situation where some students might forget some of the material. And typically as you go through the practice, it comes back and refreshes for some of those kids that are advanced math kids. I got to thank you. You're very welcome. So thank you for thanking me. Do you recommend taking the LEAP prep course before any attempt to test? Yeah, I do actually. I have one student that's already in college, and I kind of did a small little diagnostic test at home just to kind of see where he was, but he did the prep course before his first attempt. And then we built on that first attempt score and tried to get it higher. So I do think it's great to send kids in with some strategies, some practice, some test-taking tips, some tools on pacing and timing, because it is a test that most kids have trouble finishing if they haven't done a little practice and they're not comfortable with how the test is formatted. So I think it's great. Now, if a student wants to try to prep on their own, we are happy at LEAP to provide you with a self-study plan that at no cost. All you have to do is email me. I'm going to collect some data on your child, and then I'll map out if they want to try to study on their own. But I would recommend that they do something prior to their first attempt. Obviously, we feel that the LEAP course does a great job. Kids get great results with it. Those that have taken the test prior to taking our course typically are seeing a little over a 3-point increase on their composite score. So, kind of keep that in mind. I do think it's good to send your child in with some tools and so that they're comfortable on that first attempt. Okay, what's the difference between the LEAP diagnostic test and the actual test? What diagnosis is done after taking the test? So basically, our diagnostic test is a free retired ACT test that we give on a Saturday. We try to mock it up like a real testing situation. It does not count. So the good news is if your child doesn't do well in it, a college isn't going to see it. It doesn't count for anything. The bad news is if your child does really well in it, you cannot submit it to a college. We are not an official testing center. We're not allowed to officially administer the test. So our diagnostic test is just sort of an opportunity for kids to come in if they want to do that baseline or cold test just to see where they are. They can do it in a free setting that's low pressure. They get to keep the practice test booklet with all the questions in it. They get to keep their answer sheets. So, and then we do a follow-up webinar that will explain the results in general terms. It's about a 20-minute webinar to explain what to do with these results. And then if you want an individual analysis via phone or email, we can do that on an individual basis with each student that takes it. So we try to offer those tests throughout the year. We offer, so far we've had 2 this school year. We're going to offer another one on December 9th, as I mentioned, and then we'll have probably one in January, and then last year we offered a couple in like June timeframe. So about 4, 5, 6 times a year we do offer this. So keep an eye out if you're not available December 9th and you want to take it a future date, you can keep an eye out for our January dates. Now that is only going to be for the folks that actually live in either Columbus or Cincinnati. We don't have that available for people that are out of state. So, okay, it looks like I've come to the end of my questions. You guys all had some great questions. I really appreciate your attentiveness and you guys and participation. So we will be wrapping up at this point in time. If you have any questions that are specific to your child, you can email us at info@leaprogram.com. You will also be receiving a recording of this webinar at the conclusion. It has to upload and it takes a little time, but you will get an email with a link if you want to refer back to this. So again, thank you for your time. I hope you guys all have a wonderful evening and take care. Bye-bye.